The violinists were sawing through Gershwin when Richard Hale saw the boys. He had just lifted his champagne flute to acknowledge a hedge fund friend, smile cemented. Cufflinks catching the candelabra light. When two small faces tilted up from the edge of the crowd and fixed on him with a kind of unblinking curiosity that felt like an accusation. The ballroom at the Astor felt suddenly airless. Crystal, gold leaf, murmured pledges for pediatric research. His world, curated and under control, went soft around the edges. Those eyes. His eyes. Slate blue, with the faint crescent of a birthmark clinging to the left iris like a smudge of smoke. The older boy, older by a minute, perhaps had the same stubborn cowlick that had defied combs on Richard from age 5 through 60. The other had a dimple that flashed and disappeared like a signal. He caught himself taking a step forward. Then another. The smile drying on his face. No. He could not be that man, the one who goes awry in public. He was Richard Hale, chairman, benefactor, survivor of more market winters than these people had seen Thanksgivings. But his blood knew something his mind refused to name. The string section swelled. The donors clapped as if on cue. Somewhere a photographer's strobe went off, then another, a scatter of small detonations. And then she appeared behind the boys, Anna Moore, her hair pinned up in a way that tried to be formal and ended up honest. She wore a navy dress that had clearly been chosen for practicality. Pockets. Thank God. Mothers needed pockets. His heart gave a private, traitorous lurch. Richard? Someone said to his right, a senator's wife with lacquered hair. You promised the board you'd say a few words at dessert. He nodded without looking at her. The boys were only 10 paces away now, Anna guiding them to a table by a pillar, where they could see the stage but might, with luck, be missed by the stage. Except they would not be missed. Not by him. The memory came like a draft under a closed door. A hotel bar near Park and 61st, rain varnishing the street, laughter not entirely his, a kindness he hadn't earned. He had left that night like a coward, convinced he'd done the right thing because he'd done the decisive thing. He told himself she would forget him as easily as he had tried to forget himself. Now 2 boys carried his features like small lanterns through a room that traded in polished reflections. He could feel the room noticing him notice them. He slipped past a cluster of trustees, and reached the pillar just as Anna bent to help the dimpled one, with a stubborn napkin ring. She looked up. For a heartbeat, neither of them inhabited the lives they had curated. There was only the shared, stark knowledge of cause and effect. Good evening, Miss Moore, he managed, and heard how useless the line sounded in the face of those faces. The older boy stared at Richard's wrists as if measuring the man by the weight of his watch. They're mine? He said. And there it was. The question that emptied and filled the room at once. For a moment, the music seemed to recede, making a bowl of silence around the question. Anna's jaw set. The older boy reached for the younger's hand, a gesture so practiced it was ritual. The chandelier hummed with electricity. Or perhaps that was his pulse. If you're listening, and your chest tightened just now for the woman in this moment caught between truth and 100 watching eyes, tap like and tell us in the comments what you would do in her place. Would you answer him here, in front of donors and cameras, or hold the truth for a safer room? Anna stood, smoothing the skirt that needed no smoothing. Mr. Hale, she said, the formality a shield. We should not do this here. Her voice was even, which meant it cost her something to keep it even. He saw the small things. A pale line of flour on her sleeve had she baked earlier with them? A faint scar at the base of her thumb. The kind you get lifting things you cannot drop. There is a room off the corridor, he said. Already turning. Already sure she would follow because the alternative was spectacle. She guided the boys to a volunteer in a blue sash, stay where Miss Julie can see you, and then she was matching his stride. Along the wall, a portrait of Astor's watched them with the skepticism of old money. A donor in pearls pretended to study the dessert buffet and absolutely recorded their passage in her mind. Outside the ballroom, the corridor was a hush of velvet and patterned carpet. A young security guard straightened when he saw Richard's face and opened a side door without being asked. Inside, a boardroom repurposed for coats and spare centerpieces. The kind of room where deals are softened with Earl Grey. I should start, Anna said, before he could marshal the mess of words charging his throat. Because you asked a question you had many chances to ask 2 years ago and did not. The rebuke was clean, almost gentle. He had earned none of her gentleness. He tried the old defenses. Timing, discretion, grief for a wife gone a decade and the odd cruelty that grief sometimes becomes when you don't set it down. But the room did not accept those. Neither did she. I don't want your money, she said. And he flinched because he had been preparing the crisp, humiliating sound of a checkbook in his head. I want my sons to be safe. I want names to be words we can use without fear. I want to never again have to calculate a route through a lobby based on where your friends might be standing. Sons, he repeated, the word landing in him with a weight he recognized as permanent. Their names, he said. Because he needed them like a man coming out of anesthesia needs air. Calvin, she said. And Nathan. He said them to himself, Calvin and Nathan, and felt something unlock that had not been stuck but sealed. He became aware of his body the way you become aware of a room after a fire alarm stops. Heat in his hands, a prickling at the back of his neck where his barber never cut quite close enough. Do they know? Anything? They know they are loved, she said. They know we do not speak badly of strangers because strangers sometimes turn out to be family. A ghost of humor. There and gone. They know their mother keeps promises. I told them we were coming tonight because there would be balloons and a chocolate fountain, if no one important decided sugar is vulgar. The corner of his mouth remembered how to lift. It is, he said, by habit. But the fountain is already on. The board likes people to believe in abundance. People like to believe in honesty, she said. Not unkindly. And the mouth he wore to please boardrooms closed again. He thought of the boys' faces. The way the older one catalogued, the way the younger balanced lightness and caution as if it were a game. He saw them at 5, at 9, at 13. He saw graduation caps, the smell of hot mortar on a July sidewalk, a glove of infield dust. He saw his own father's hand on his shoulder the day he first tied a tie and the day he first loosened one as a signal of surrender after an awful meeting. For years Richard had told himself he had surrendered his right to a certain kind of future. The future, it turned out, had not accepted his resignation. I will not drag them through a scandal, he said, because that was the shape of the trap he could see. I won't let the evening news teach them the word paternity. Then don't, Anna said. Be the man you want them to learn that word from. Quietly. Properly. Without cameras. You have resources I will never have. I have knowledge you will never have. If there is any justice left in this country, it is made by adults choosing the right thing before the headline chooses for them. He could have argued. He had built a life on arguing past other people's certainties. But he felt, with the specificity of pain, that she was offering him the only version of dignity still available. I'll take a test, he said, and heard how quickly he had chosen verbs that made the future visible. We'll do it tonight. Discreetly. My physician. Tomorrow morning, she said. After the boys sleep. After you've slept on the reality that their bedtime is at 8:30, not when the markets close. He would have smiled again, but the smile would have been a cover. What he felt was not wit but awe. Awe, and fear. And something that might have been gratitude if he were brave enough to name it. A knock. The young security guard again, apologetic. Sir, the MC is introducing you. He had forgotten he was meant to be the voice of benevolence. 2 minutes, Richard said, and the boy nodded and vanished. I need to speak on that stage, Richard said to Anna. And I need to do it without looking like a man who has just stepped off a cliff. Then step onto it, she said. Talk about children who need care. Think about 2 of them. And don't lie. I haven't lied, he said. And she tilted her head. Not yet. He looked at her then as he had not permitted himself to look the night he left. Fully. He saw the cost ledgered in the lines at the corners of her mouth and the stubborn hope that refuses zero-sum arithmetic. In his chest, an old instrument tuned itself. Calvin and Nathan, he said again, because saying their names made the air more usable. They like trains, she said, a faint softening. And peanut butter in geometric shapes. And dogs they don't have. The rest, you can learn, if you show up. I will, he said. And felt how large and small the promise was at once. They returned to the corridor. The world expanded to its former size, except it did not. It was larger. And he was smaller in the right way. At the ballroom doors, he stopped. May I say hello? 2 minutes, she said, and no promises you won't be sticky. They crossed to the pillar. The boys had gained glowing swords from somewhere and were dueling with admirable restraint. This is Mr. Hale, Anna said, kneeling to eye level. He helps build hospitals. He is very good at meetings. He is learning about other important things. The older boy Calvin gave a solemn nod as if this resume were acceptable. Nathan, all dimple and candor, raised a chocolate-striped hand. Richard did not hesitate. Gentlemen, he said, and shook. And did not mind the sugar that sealed the handshake. The MC's voice boomed his name. Cameras swung. He stood, and for the first time in years, he understood how to mean what he was about to say. The ride back to the estate was silent, but the silence was not empty. It was loaded, heavy, thick with questions Amelia didn't know how to ask and emotions Eleanor Vance could barely contain. The city lights slipped past the tinted glass, neon fading into the long dark stretches of highway until finally the wrought iron gates of the Vance mansion loomed into view. Amelia shifted uncomfortably in the back seat of the Rolls. She had never been this far uptown, never seen lawns trimmed like velvet carpets or houses that looked like private museums. She tugged at her frayed jacket sleeve, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked in this world of manicured wealth. Eleanor, her eyes still rimmed red, seemed not to notice. She was staring at the locket in Amelia's hand as though it were a ghost she could not put to rest. When the car rolled to a stop before the stone steps, Charles, the family butler, opened the door with his usual composure. Yet his practiced eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise when he saw the young waitress step out behind his employer. "Mrs. Vance," he murmured, his voice steady. "Shall I prepare the library?" Eleanor's answer was quiet, almost fragile. "Yes, Charles. And bring tea. For two." Amelia followed hesitantly, her sneakers squeaking against marble floors polished to mirror shine. The house smelled of cedar, leather, and old money, a scent she had only ever associated with banks or funeral parlors. The library swallowed her whole. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched upward like cathedral walls, heavy with books bound in gold and dust. A fire glowed low in the hearth beneath a portrait of a smiling man whose eyes seemed to follow her across the room. Eleanor lowered herself into a deep chair, her body heavy with decades of battles fought in boardrooms, in marriage, in silence. "Please sit," she said, gesturing toward the stiff chair across from her. Amelia perched on its edge, nervous, like a student summoned to the principal's office. She clutched the locket tightly, afraid that if she let go it might vanish, and with it the fragile connection she felt forming in this surreal evening. For a long moment Eleanor said nothing. She only looked at the photograph above the mantelpiece. At last her voice broke the hush. "That man. Richard. My husband. He designed the locket. There was only one." She paused, her eyes glistening again. "He gave it to me when we still believed life would never betray us. 31 years ago, I passed it to my daughter." She turned her gaze to Amelia, sharp now, searching. "Your mother. Isabella." Amelia felt her breath hitch. The name sounded strange, foreign even, as if spoken in a language she wasn't meant to understand. "My mother never spoke of you," she whispered. "She said her parents were gone." Eleanor closed her eyes, her hand trembling as it rested against the armrest. "Gone," she repeated bitterly. "No, child. Not gone. Taken from me. By pride. By stubbornness. By a love I was too blind to bless." Her words hung like smoke. The butler entered quietly, setting down the tea tray with silver spoons that looked too delicate to touch. Amelia wrapped her hands around the porcelain cup, grateful for its warmth. Her world had tilted, and she was desperate for something solid. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice low, a confession. "Your mother loved a man I would not accept. Daniel Reed. A musician, gentle, but penniless. I wanted security for her. I thought love would not be enough. I was wrong." Her voice cracked again. "She left me that night. Packed a bag, walked out into the storm, and never came back. For decades I searched. I begged detectives, prayed to God, offered everything short of my own soul. Nothing. She disappeared as if the earth swallowed her whole. Until you." Amelia's hand trembled on the cup. She thought of her mother's tired eyes, the way she painted late into the night, always with a sadness she never explained. She thought of the funeral 5 years ago, a rainy day when she stood alone, because there was no family, no one to call. And now this woman was telling her the emptiness of her life had been carved by choice, by pride, by secrets. Amelia opened the locket with trembling fingers. The faded photograph of Richard and Eleanor smiled back at her, preserved in silver. She swallowed hard. "She told me my father died in a car crash before I was born. She never said his name." Eleanor's eyes sharpened, hope flickering through grief. "Daniel, did she never?" Amelia shook her head. "I don't know if he lived or died. All I had was her, and she never let me ask." Eleanor pressed her lips together, her mind racing. For a woman who had commanded empires, this was the first time in decades she admitted defeat not to a rival, not to shareholders, but to time itself. Her voice softened. "You are my granddaughter." The words were not triumphant but broken, a confession of guilt wrapped in wonder. Amelia stared, torn between disbelief and a strange ache that had lived in her chest for years. Granddaughter, she echoed, the word strange and heavy on her tongue. She had longed for family, but not like this, not so suddenly. Not drenched in grief and secrets. A log popped in the fireplace, sending sparks upward. The silence pressed in until Amelia finally whispered, "Why now? Why me?" Eleanor's gaze turned inward. "Because life is cruel, and sometimes it gives us back what it stole when we are least ready. I don't deserve you. I don't deserve this second chance. But here you are." Amelia's eyes stung with unshed tears. She thought of her mother again, Isabella, the woman who taught her how to sketch the skyline, who hummed lullabies through her coughing fits, who never let her forget that dignity mattered, even in poverty. She thought of how her mother's silence had shaped her entire existence. And she thought of this wealthy, broken woman who had everything and yet sat before her hollowed by regret. Amelia set the teacup down and stood abruptly. "I need air," she said, her voice shaking. Eleanor didn't stop her. She only nodded, her chin trembling, eyes following the young woman as she walked toward the French doors that opened onto the balcony. The night was sharp and cold, the Hudson River gleaming like dark glass in the distance. Amelia leaned against the railing, the locket clutched to her chest. Her mind whirled. For years she had been nobody. Invisible, scraping tips to pay rent. Now she was somebody's granddaughter. Tied by blood to wealth and history. But she wasn't sure if it was salvation or another burden. Inside, Eleanor watched from the shadows. In her chest burned a fragile hope, but also fear. Because if Amelia was truly Isabella's daughter, then somewhere, somehow, someone else might know. Secrets had a way of surviving. And Eleanor had made enemies in her long reign over power and fortune. Enemies who might see Amelia not as family, but as leverage. She whispered to herself, barely audible above the crackle of fire. "Polaris. Guide her better than I did her mother." Amelia closed her eyes against the cold night air, her pulse steadying with resolve. She had come into this house as a waitress. She was leaving as something else entirely. The next morning began with a storm, rain clawing at the mansion's windows and thunder rolling like some ancient judge pounding his gavel. Amelia woke in a guest room so large it felt borrowed from a movie set. The bed was wider than her apartment back in Queens, the linens crisp with starch, the air faint with lavender polish. For a moment she thought she had dreamed everything. The locket, the confession, the firelit talk. But then she turned and saw the clothes folded neatly on a chair. Not her own, and the truth returned. Eleanor had left her a note in elegant script. "Breakfast in the East Dining Hall. We have much to discuss." Amelia sat up, hugging her knees, her heart pounding with questions. Part of her wanted to run, to take the locket and escape this gilded labyrinth before it swallowed her whole. Yet something deeper held her here, an ache she could no longer name as hunger or grief, perhaps the shape of belonging she had never known. She dressed in the plain blouse and slacks provided, her sneakers the only trace of her old world, and followed the hushed corridors until the scent of coffee and eggs drew her forward. The East Dining Hall was absurd, ceilings painted with cherubs, a table long enough to seat 30 though only Eleanor sat at its head, dressed in gray silk, her hair arranged with military precision. She looked stronger today, as if confessing had peeled away a layer of sorrow, though the hollowness in her eyes lingered. "Sit, child," she said, her voice steady but gentle. Amelia obeyed, choosing a chair halfway down the table as if distance might shield her. Eleanor sipped her tea. "I did not sleep. I kept seeing her face, your mother, the night she left. And now yours, so like hers it hurts." Amelia picked at her toast, unsure how to respond. Finally she asked, "Why tell me all this now? You could have ignored me. Pretended you never saw the locket." Eleanor's lips tightened. "Because lies rot the soul, Amelia. I have lied to the world for decades. I will not lie to you. But truth is not without danger." Amelia frowned. "Danger? From who?" The older woman leaned forward, her rings glinting in the weak light. "When Isabella left, she carried more than her heart. She carried knowledge, whispers of dealings my husband made with men who never wanted sunlight on their contracts. If she confided in Daniel, or if she kept records, there are people who might still be searching." Amelia blinked. "That was 30 years ago." "Yes," Eleanor said, "but greed does not age. There are fortunes built on silence. Your existence may stir questions that powerful men thought long buried." Amelia felt the weight of the locket grow heavier around her neck. She had always thought of herself as invisible, insignificant. Now she was a target in a story older than her own birth. Before she could answer, the door opened and Charles entered, his expression composed but his voice taut. "Mrs. Vance, there is a visitor." He insists on speaking with you immediately. Eleanor frowned. Who? Mr. Whitaker, from the foundation board. A shadow crossed her face. She glanced at Amelia. Stay. Listen, but say nothing. The butler ushered in a tall man with a tan too polished for the weather, his suit cut with a precision that screamed money. His smile was charming but his eyes were calculating. Eleanor, he said warmly. I hated to intrude at this hour, but urgent matters rarely wait for decorum. Eleanor did not rise. You could have called, Lawrence. He waved a hand as though brushing aside etiquette. His gaze slid quickly to Amelia, assessing, cataloging. And who might this be? A guest, Eleanor said firmly. She has no business with you. Lawrence's smile sharpened. Forgive me. I thought perhaps the papers were true. A waitress found wandering in the company of the great Eleanor Vance. One cannot help but wonder at the story. Amelia stiffened, heat rising in her chest. Eleanor's voice was cold steel. My household is not your concern. State your business. Lawrence sat without invitation. Very well. The foundation has received disturbing inquiries. Someone is asking about the old contracts, the ones from Richard's expansion years, offshore holdings, land deals upstate. I assumed you would want to know. Eleanor's knuckles whitened around her teacup. And what do you want, Lawrence? His smile widened. To protect the family legacy, of course. Secrets have a way of leaking, especially when new faces appear. His eyes flicked toward Amelia again, pointed. Best to contain them before gossip becomes evidence. The implication was clear. Amelia's throat tightened. She wanted to shout, to demand what he meant, but Eleanor's warning glance kept her still. Lawrence rose, smoothing his jacket. Think carefully, Eleanor. We all want what's best for the name. Do call me when you're ready to discuss how to keep it safe. He departed with the ease of a man who believed he had planted a seed of fear. The door closed, leaving the room heavy with silence. Eleanor exhaled shakily. That vulture has been circling for years. He suspects more than he admits. Amelia leaned forward. What did he mean evidence? About my mother? Eleanor looked at her with sorrow. I don't know. But I fear she carried proof of Richard's darkest dealings. If so, Lawrence would pay dearly to control it. And he will see you as a thread to pull. Amelia's mind reeled. Her mother, the quiet painter who scraped by selling sketches in subway stations, linked to corporate corruption? It seemed absurd. Yet the certainty in Eleanor's eyes told her this was no fantasy. For the rest of the day Amelia wandered the mansion in a daze. Corridors echoing her footsteps, portraits of stern ancestors staring down like jurors. She ended up in the music room, where a grand piano sat gathering dust. She pressed one key, soft, and the note lingered. A memory surfaced, her mother humming, painting, whispering, beauty survives even in shadows. Amelia sat on the bench and let her fingers find a simple tune, clumsy but true. She didn't notice Eleanor standing in the doorway, watching with a mixture of pride and regret. That evening, after dinner eaten mostly in silence, Eleanor spoke again. Amelia, you must decide. You can walk away, pretend none of this exists, and I will respect that. Or you can stay, and together we may uncover why your mother disappeared from my world. But if you stay, you will be stepping into battles fought with whispers, money, and knives hidden in smiles. Amelia looked at the flames dancing in the hearth. She thought of the years alone, the unanswered questions, the way the locket had burned in her palm since the moment Eleanor recognized it. She thought of Lawrence's smirk, the threat beneath his politeness. And she thought of her mother's voice, always telling her that truth mattered, even when it hurt. She straightened, her voice firm though her hands trembled. I'm not leaving. If my mother carried secrets, I need to know. I need to know who she was, and who I am. Eleanor's eyes glistened, pride and fear mingling. Very well, child. Then the past is no longer past. It begins again, tonight. The storm outside thundered as if in agreement, rattling the old windows of the house. And in that crack of lightning, Amelia felt it, the first taste of the war she had just chosen to enter. The storm passed overnight, leaving the mansion steeped in a damp silence. The gardens glistening under a pale morning Sunday. Amelia woke restless, her dreams filled with half-heard voices, her mother's face slipping away just as she tried to grasp it. She dressed quickly and wandered the halls until she found herself in the library again. Eleanor was already there, seated at the great oak desk with papers spread before her. She looked smaller than the night before. Her silk robe draped loosely around her shoulders. A woman carrying decades of regrets and suddenly burdened with hope. Without looking up, Eleanor spoke. I thought you might come here. Your mother loved this room. She would sit on that very bench by the window and sketch the river. Amelia crossed to the window seat, her fingers brushing the grooves in the wood as though searching for invisible signatures. Why didn't you stop her? She asked quietly. Eleanor's eyes lifted, rimmed with sorrow. I tried. But my trying was cruel. I told her Daniel was beneath her. That love was not enough. I believed wealth could shield her from suffering. Instead, it only drove her away. Amelia turned, her voice sharp. So she left, and you never saw her again. And now you want me to fill the space she left. Eleanor flinched at the truth in her tone. I want to make amends, she said softly. If I cannot undo what pride destroyed, perhaps I can protect what remains. Charles entered quietly with a tray of breakfast, bowing before setting it down. As he withdrew, Eleanor's voice hardened. We must speak plainly. Lawrence Whitaker is dangerous. He cloaks it in manners, but I know him. He has been waiting for weakness in this family. You are that weakness, Amelia. If he proves your mother carried evidence, he will use it to discredit me, perhaps even destroy you. Amelia clenched her fists. Then we find the truth first. Eleanor studied her, as if weighing courage against naivete. Your mother left behind a trail I could never follow. But you may. You are her blood. You might see where I could not. Before Amelia could ask more, the doorbell echoed faintly from the foyer. Moments later Charles returned, his usually calm expression unsettled. Mrs. Vance, detectives are here. They claim to be following up on inquiries made by the Foundation. Eleanor stiffened. Send them in. Two men entered, both in dark suits, their badges glinting. The taller introduced himself as Detective Moran, his partner as Hayes. They asked pointed questions about Isabella Reed. About her disappearance. About any documents she might have left. Amelia sat frozen, her heart thundering. Eleanor answered with practiced composure, insisting she knew nothing, that Isabella had cut ties decades ago. Yet Moran's gaze slid toward Amelia, sharp and knowing. And you, miss? You look about the right age to be her daughter. Did she ever mention financial dealings, old papers, anything unusual? Amelia's throat tightened. She thought of the boxes under her mother's bed, the journals she had never dared to read, the way her mother sometimes muttered about promises broken. But she forced herself to shake her head. No. She never spoke of it. Moran studied her for a long moment before slipping a card across the desk. If you recall anything, call us. For your own safety. When they left, Eleanor exhaled shakily. They are not merely following procedure. Lawrence has set them on us. He wants to intimidate. Amelia picked up the card, the embossed seal cold under her fingers. Then whatever my mother carried, it must still matter. We can't ignore it. That evening, Amelia could not sleep. She slipped from her room and returned to the library, guided by an unease she could not shake. The fire had burned down to embers, the portraits looming in shadow. She found herself drawn again to the window seat where her mother once sketched. As she shifted the cushions, her hand brushed against a loose panel. Her pulse quickened. She pried it open and found a narrow compartment. Inside lay a faded sketchbook. Edges worn. Pages brittle. She opened it with trembling hands. It was her mother's. Unmistakably lines of the river. The skyline. Eleanor's profile softened by memory. But tucked between the drawings were notes, hurried and cryptic. Names she didn't know. Dates circled. Symbols that looked like corporate seals. And one phrase repeated, promise broken. Keep safe. Amelia's breath caught. This was what Lawrence wanted. Proof. Evidence her mother had carried. She clutched the book to her chest, torn between rushing to Eleanor and hiding it forever. Behind her, the floor creaked. She spun, heart racing, but saw nothing but shadows. Still, she felt watched. She replaced the panel, kept the book with her, and hurried back to her room. The next day Eleanor noticed her pale face at breakfast. You found something, she said quietly. Amelia hesitated, then nodded, sliding the sketchbook across the table. Eleanor opened it slowly, reverently, as though holding her daughter again. Tears blurred her vision as she read the notes. She knew, Eleanor whispered. She knew what Richard was doing. Offshore accounts, land stolen from families too poor to fight back. She kept record, perhaps as protection, or as revenge. Amelia's chest tightened. If Lawrence gets this. Eleanor slammed the book shut. He must not. He will twist it, bury it, and us with it. We must guard it until we understand. The day passed under a haze of fear. Every sound outside seemed suspicious. Every phone call an echo of threat. By evening, Amelia was certain someone had been following her when she walked briefly in the garden. She returned shaken, only to find Eleanor pacing the library, the sketchbook clutched to her chest. "He will come for it," Eleanor said. "He will come for you. We must prepare." Amelia felt the weight of the moment press down. She was no longer a waitress scraping by. She was heir to a legacy of secrets, caught in a battle she barely understood. Yet as she looked into Eleanor's determined eyes, she knew retreat was no longer possible. She remembered her mother's voice, frail but fierce, telling her to hold on to what was right. And she whispered to herself, barely audible, "I won't run." Outside, a car engine idled too long before pulling away into the night. The night after Amelia found the sketchbook, the mansion felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. She barely slept, each creak of the old beams sounding like a footstep, each gust of wind against the shutters like a whisper from someone listening too closely. By dawn, she rose from the bed and paced her room, staring at the velvet box where she had tucked the locket away. Her mother's face in her mind, her grandmother's warnings in her ears. When she finally went down to breakfast, Eleanor was already seated, a letter opener clenched tightly in her hand, her teacup untouched. "He will move soon," Eleanor said without looking up. "Lawrence knows we have something. The police visit wasn't random. They're watching." Amelia sank into her chair. "So what do we do?" Eleanor's eyes lifted, sharp and resolute. "We do what Isabella would have done. We fight with the truth." She pushed the sketchbook toward Amelia. "But we cannot parade it to the press yet. First we need to understand what's in here. And then we must find someone who cannot be bought." Amelia flipped open the sketchbook again, scanning the frantic notes. A date leapt out, the 17th of March 1994. Beneath it, the name of a small town upstate, Greenville. There was also a sketched seal she didn't recognize, a circle with a hawk and 3 stars. "What is Greenville?" Amelia asked. Eleanor's lips thinned. "Land. Richard acquired parcels up there decades ago. There were accusations he forced families off their property. It was quieted with lawyers and money. If Isabella wrote it here, she must have seen something. Perhaps documents, perhaps witnesses." Amelia traced the ink with her finger. "Then that's where we start." Eleanor hesitated. "It's dangerous. Lawrence has eyes everywhere. But you are less known. If anyone can move quietly, it is you." Amelia's chest tightened. She had never been farther than a bus ride from the city. Now she was expected to dig into her family's buried sins like some kind of detective. Yet something inside her steadied. "I'll go." That afternoon, Charles arranged a discreet car, not one of the gleaming luxury sedans, but an older Buick that blended into traffic. Amelia dressed simply, pulling her hair into a ponytail, the sketchbook hidden in her bag. Before she left, Eleanor caught her hand. "Do not trust anyone easily. Remember, child, loyalty in this world is often rented, never owned." The drive upstate took hours. Rain clouds gathered again, the landscape shifting from steel and glass to bare trees and shuttered storefronts. Greenville was a tired town, its main street, lined with faded awnings and cracked sidewalks. Amelia parked near a diner and walked with purpose, trying to quiet the pounding of her heart. She stopped at the town hall, a squat brick building with peeling paint. Inside, an older clerk with bifocals looked up from his paperwork. "Help you, miss?" Amelia swallowed. "I'm doing research, old land acquisitions. Around 1994. Do you keep records here?" The clerk shuffled through files, then disappeared into a back room. When he returned, he set a box on the counter. "Sign in. Take your time." Amelia leafed through deeds and contracts. Her breath caught when she saw the name Richard Vance. Page after page bore his signature, marking transfers of farmland and houses. But some had notes scrawled in another hand. "Family refused, eviction ordered." She copied what she could, her hands shaking. Then she noticed another name scribbled in the margins. Owen Reed. Her mother's father. Her grandfather. Her pulse raced. Owen Reed had worked here, perhaps even resisted these deals. Could this be what Isabella meant by promises broken? A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned sharply. A man in a dark suit stood too close, his smile polite but his eyes cold. "Looking for something?" Amelia clutched her bag. "Just family history." The man's smile widened. "Funny. That's exactly what I was told you might say." She tried to step back, but he blocked her path. "Mr. Whitaker sends his regards." Panic surged, but at that moment the clerk returned, oblivious. The suited man tipped his head and walked out, but not before murmuring, "Careful what you dig up. Graves don't like being disturbed." Amelia's knees shook as she signed out and hurried to her car. She drove straight back to the city, checking the rearview mirror at every turn. When she reached the mansion, night had already fallen. Eleanor was waiting in the library, a decanter of whiskey, half empty on the table. Amelia spilled everything: the documents, the name Owen Reed, the man in the suit. Eleanor's face blanched at the mention of her father-in-law's name. Owen knew, she whispered. He must have discovered Richard's dealings. That's why Isabella guarded the records. She was protecting her father's truth. Amelia laid the copies on the desk. Then we have proof. People were forced off their land. Families lost everything. This can't stay hidden. Eleanor's eyes glistened. If we reveal it, Lawrence will strike harder. He will smear you, call you an opportunist, drag Isabella's name through the mud. But if we stay silent, he wins anyway. Amelia's voice trembled but held. Then we don't stay silent. We fight back. At that moment a crash sounded from the foyer. Both women froze. Charles burst into the library, his usually calm demeanor broken. Intruders. The locks were forced. Eleanor rose, her age forgotten. Amelia. Hide the book. Amelia shoved the sketchbook into her jacket just as heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Shadows loomed against the doorframe. Lawrence Whitaker himself stepped in, flanked by two men in dark suits. His smile was smooth, but his eyes burned with triumph. Eleanor, he drawled. How rude. Keeping secrets from your oldest ally. And here I thought we shared everything. His gaze slid to Amelia. Sharp as a blade. And you? The waitress who became an heir. Tell me, did your mother leave you anything besides debts? Perhaps a sketchbook? Amelia's heart thundered, but she kept her hand steady against her side, the book pressed to her ribs. Eleanor faced him with steel. Get out, Lawrence. He chuckled. Not without what I came for. You can hand it to me. Or my friends can search this place until it turns up. Either way, the truth will be mine. Amelia's blood ran cold. She could feel the weight of her mother's voice inside her, whispering to stand firm. She lifted her chin and met Lawrence's gaze. It's not yours to take. It never was. For the first time, his smile faltered, just a fraction, but enough to show the menace beneath. The confrontation they had feared was here, and the sketchbook was the only shield between justice and ruin. The air in the library seemed to shrink, the firelight casting long, jagged shadows against the shelves as Lawrence stepped forward. His men flanked him, their suits cut to conceal strength rather than flatter it. Eleanor straightened, her cane forgotten by the chair, her posture a reminder of the battles she had once fought across boardrooms and ballrooms alike. Amelia stood rooted, the sketchbook burning hot against her ribs, her heart thundering so loud she was sure they all heard it. Lawrence's voice dripped with mock civility. Come now, Eleanor. You've grown frail, and frailty invites disaster. Do you want your granddaughter here dragged into something she doesn't understand? Give me the book. And she can return to her little life, unscathed. Eleanor's eyes flashed, her voice sharp as glass. You mistake her, Lawrence. She understands more than you ever will. She knows truth has weight, heavier than your empire of lies. Lawrence's smile thinned. He signaled, and one of his men stepped closer to Amelia. Instinct roared in her chest. For a moment she froze. But then her mother's voice filled her mind, gentle yet fierce. Never let them decide who you are. She pulled the sketchbook from her jacket and held it high. Is this what you want? The man lunged, but she darted backward, the edge of the rug sliding under her sneakers. You'll have to take it from me. Lawrence's eyes gleamed with hunger, but there was a flicker of something else: hesitation. Amelia realized then that Lawrence had not expected defiance. He had counted on fear. Eleanor took that moment. She picked up the letter opener she had kept close. Not as a weapon but as a symbol of resolve. And pointed it at him. If you so much as touch her, you'll face not only me but every lawyer and journalist I've kept at bay for decades. I will bury you in daylight, Lawrence. He chuckled, but the sound was brittle. You wouldn't dare. The Vance name would fall with me. Perhaps it should. Eleanor snapped. Perhaps it's time. The words landed heavy in the room, even on Amelia's ears. It was not just a threat, it was truth. The legacy Eleanor had defended for so long was rotten at its roots, and maybe justice required its collapse. One of Lawrence's men reached forward again, and this time Amelia moved first. She swung the sketchbook like a shield, the spine catching his wrist. He cursed, surprised more than hurt. But the move broke the spell of fear that had bound her. Adrenaline surged through her veins. She ran toward the door, clutching the book, but another man blocked her path. For a heartbeat, panic clamped down. Then Charles appeared from the corridor, carrying the old fireplace poker like a soldier carrying a banner. His calm was gone, replaced with fire. "Leave," he barked. "This house has no place for thieves." The standoff stretched taut. Lawrence's men glanced at one another, weighing cost against command. Lawrence himself narrowed his eyes, the mask of civility slipping to reveal raw fury. "This isn't finished," he hissed. "You can hide behind sentiment, Eleanor, but the truth in that book will destroy you, too. Remember that." He signaled his men, and they withdrew, footsteps echoing through the marble halls until the door slammed behind them. Silence filled the library, broken only by the ragged sound of Amelia's breath. She clutched the sketchbook, her hands trembling. Eleanor moved to her, placed both palms on her shoulders. "You were brave, child. Braver than I ever was when your mother walked away." She would be proud. Amelia swallowed, tears stinging her eyes. "But he's right, isn't he? If we release this, it won't just ruin him. It will ruin you, too." Eleanor sighed, her face etched with both weariness and resolve. "Perhaps. But ruin built on lies is no loss. It is liberation." They sat together by the dying fire. The sketchbook opened between them. Page after page bore testimony, dates, names, contracts that spoke not only of Richard Vance's greed but of those who had helped him. Amelia read aloud, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Families forced out, their homes bulldozed for developments that lined the pockets of men like Whitaker. "And my grandfather, Owen Reed. He tried to stop it." Eleanor nodded, tears glistening. "He was a better man than Richard ever deserved as a rival. Isabella must have carried his fight when he could not." Amelia's voice cracked. "She carried it alone. And it destroyed her." Eleanor reached for her hand. "Not destroyed. Transformed. It brought you here. To finish what she could not." Days passed in a blur. Amelia and Eleanor pored over the sketchbook, cross-referencing the records with public deeds, tracing the threads Isabella had left. They found names of families still alive, survivors of the forced evictions. Amelia met them quietly. In diners and modest living rooms, listening to stories of loss but also of resilience. She heard how children grew up watching bulldozers crush their homes, how fathers died bitter with defeat, how mothers carried keys to doors that no longer existed. She promised them their voices would be heard. And for the first time in her life, she felt not like a waitress scraping for tips but like a woman standing on solid ground. When the time came, Eleanor called a press conference in the marble atrium of the foundation. The world expected the same poised philanthropist. But what they saw was something different. An old woman stripped of vanity, standing beside a young one who carried the weight of 2 generations. Amelia clutched the sketchbook as cameras flashed. Eleanor's voice trembled only once as she began. "For decades, the Vance name has been gilded with wealth. But wealth built on injustice is not legacy, it is theft. My husband, Richard Vance, took land from honest families. My daughter, Isabella, tried to expose it. She paid with her freedom. Perhaps her life. Today, with my granddaughter, Amelia Reed, I choose truth over silence." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lawrence lurked at the edge, his smile brittle. But he could not stop what unfolded. Amelia stepped forward, reading from the sketchbook, her voice clear and unwavering. She named dates, contracts, and families. She held up copies of deeds showing forced evictions. And she ended with words she had written herself, trembling with conviction. "Justice does not live in shadows. It lives in the courage to speak when silence is easier. My mother believed that. Tonight, I carry her belief." The room erupted. Some shouted questions, others applauded. Reporters surged forward. Lawrence tried to intervene, but cameras turned on him too, questions slicing into his mask of composure. Eleanor squeezed Amelia's hand, whispering, "She is here in you, Isabella. She is here." In the days that followed, investigations began. Families long silenced came forward. Lawrence's empire of influence began to crumble. Eleanor faced her own reckoning, her fortune bruised, her reputation shaken, but she did not retreat. She walked each step beside Amelia, her head high, her heart lighter than it had been in decades. One evening, weeks later, Amelia stood on the balcony overlooking the Hudson. The wind carried the scent of spring. She held the locket in her palm, tracing its edges, feeling not the weight of loss but the strength of inheritance. Eleanor joined her quietly. They stood side by side, generations apart yet bound by blood and truth. "You've changed everything," Eleanor said softly. Amelia shook her head. "No. She did. I just finally listened." They fell into silence, the river glinting under the moon, the city humming with distant life. And those scars would remain, Amelia knew this. Her mother's voice had not been lost. It had only been waiting, echoing through her, guiding her to this moment. Justice, fragile and imperfect, had found its way.